Welcome to BoilersXtra. I am Nathan Baird from the Indy Star, and today my NFL team of choice won a game handily with an intriguing young quarterback. Sam?
Sam King from the Journal and Courier. Currently, as we're recording this, the Indianapolis Colts are starting a 44-year-old grandfather who doesn't appear to have the arm strength to throw up more than 5 yards down the field. So, it's a heavily leaning on an offensive line and a running back right now.
I was thinking, if you go back to after game 6 of the last NBA Finals, this past summer's NBA Finals, and told like the most pessimistic Indianapolis sports fan in the world would not have dreamed up a scenario like today, where Phillip Rivers is starting for the Colts with their playoff future still in doubt, and the Pacers are getting run out of the gym at home against the worst team in the NBA. It's just been such a dramatic flip.
It has been a disastrous season in the injury department for pro sports teams in Indianapolis. And the team we're going to talk about today, maybe not snake bitten by injuries as much, but wasn't a great season for that team either coming out of the fall.
No, yeah, none of you tuned in to listen to us either bellyache about our NFL teams or anything like that. You're here to hear about Purdue things. We are going to talk football exclusively today. We do a lot of post-game pods. I hope you're following our YouTube channel. If you're following us there, if you're following us on iTunes or any of the podcast options, please like and subscribe. It really helps us get the word out. Even if you don't like us that much, just throw us a bone because it helps us attract more people. It helps more people hear us, and then they can join you with how much they don't like us, if you think about it that way. But we're going to talk Purdue football today, and we're kind of wrapping up some news that's happened here in the last week or so, and then kind of speculating about what's going to come next and just taking a look at this roster and what has to happen next. There's obviously going to be a transfer portal activity. Right now, it's very different than last year. You've probably already noticed that. Players can announce that they're going to enter the portal. It doesn't open until January 2nd. Last year, there was a lot of in and out, back and forth going on with portal, guys signing, guys visiting, all that sort of stuff. That is all going to happen now, allegedly, in January. And right now, it's very much you're hearing things. Some guys are putting it out there. You're probably going to be hearing about guys that Purdue is interested in. But it's a different scenario than last year, right, Sam? And I think it gives us and probably gives Purdue time, frankly, to take a breath and fully assess what it has in front of it and where it needs the most help.
Yeah, it was in a lot of ways the Wild West under the old system, and especially so for Purdue, which was going through a coaching change, and you bring a head coach in who's asking players to give him a chance. And, you hope at least the players that you want to retain do, but everybody's going to see what their options are kind of in that scenario. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. And that was the case. And a lot of players left Purdue. And that's why Purdue had 80-something new players on the roster this year. It's not going to be like that going forward. The roster's not going to have that much turnover, obviously. But this also helps in that department, too, because before you had a transfer window after the spring as well. So You're bringing guys in, in April, and some of the guys that you brought in during the December portal period, winter portal period, are exiting your program after a few months. We saw that with multiple guys from Purdue. So this is going to help some roster stability on Purdue's front anyway, but it's probably going to be that way across the board in college football.
Yeah, we'd be surprised if we see 50-some guys in and out of the portal, maybe going each way. You know what I mean? I think it's going to be a more manageable number, but it might still be a fairly significant number. And we're going to talk more about that. I want to pause on that for a second because I want to have the conversation about the staff changes that have happened, because I think it does set the stage a little bit for what might happen in the portal. But we knew that there would probably be some sort of staff changes at the end of the year. We weren't exactly sure what it was going to be. Last Monday, Barry Odom fired running backs coach Lamar Connard and offensive line coach Vance Weiss. We are recording this, by the way, on Sunday the 14th. That's why we were just talking about the NFL, obviously. So who knows, by the time you hear this Monday morning, maybe there's a new round of guys announcing they're leaving, et cetera, et cetera. It could be happening just like Barry Odom said there late in the season, right? Like check your phone and maybe you've had 5 updates. But those two, I had been we didn't speculate about it on the pod, but I'm sure I had said to you, I'd said to other people around the team, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Lamar Connor doesn't come back. And it had nothing to do with how good of a or bad of a job he did, but he was the outsider of this group. Like, Barry Odom brought all these other guys that he had connections to in some way, most of them anyway, I think. And they were guys he brought in or with him. And Lamar Connor was already here. And if you were going to shake something up, that seemed to be a guy who would probably get caught up in that. They also have in Cornell Ford, a guy who was Barry Odom's running backs coach at UNLV. He's been coaching receivers here. If you think that you need a better receivers coach, I mean, this guy's like the assistant head coach. They're not going to get rid of him. I could see him moving to running backs and bringing in another receivers coach or promoting someone to receivers coach. We'll see what happens next. But that was a position that I wasn't surprised when I heard that. I was kind of disappointed a little bit, I guess, but not surprised. I don't know if there's anybody on this staff that can point at the job their position group did this year and say, I definitely deserve to still be coaching next year. The Vance Vice was a little bit more surprising to me just because he had been with Barry Odom in UNLV. He was one of the guys who brought here, as you thought, kind of like a foundational piece of the staff. But what I think these two things in tandem told me was that Barry Odom was very dissatisfied with the running game in 2025 for good reason. It was middling at best most of the season. It was especially bad in short yardage situations. Anecdotally, I don't have the numbers on that, but it just seemed like every short yardage situation was a problem. And I think this was a message to the program. I think it was a message to the guys that they want to bring into the program that they're taking that initiative seriously.
Yeah, and Lamar Connor was the holdover, but he had a unique relationship with Devin Maccabee. That probably helped. He also had done pretty well in the 2 years that he was working under Ryan Walters. That was the position where you felt like
Tyrone Tracy.
That Tyrone Tracy's playing for the New York Giants, starting for the New York Giants. He had a great year a couple of years ago alongside Maccabee, and then last year Maccabee had a pretty decent year. Reggie Love wasn't maybe the boom, the Tyrone Tracy type boom that you hope to get with that package, but still ran the ball decently given how bad the team was. And I think that at least earned him the right to like, hey, let's see if you got some magic with this running back room. And now with what's leaving and what's there, it's just probably best to restart there because your running back room is bare. Your you're pretty much most notable running back in several years is gone now. And then the offensive line, I guess it makes sense on the fact that was a position that was just not very good across the entire front for a lot of the season. We looked at the PFF grades, and that's not a whole storytelling, system there, but it is, indicative of, did guys play well or not? And a lot of times they were below average, whatever the average line is there. I give it about a 60 is basically middle of the pack. And there were a lot of guys under that several weeks over the course of the season. So you're right. I think that Barry Odom is a hard-nosed guy. He believes in running the football, and that has to be a staple of your team. You have to be tough-minded, and it didn't seem like Purdue was the team that could do that. And like you said, those 4th and 1s, 3rd and 2s, Purdue really struggled to move the chains in those situations when it gave the ball to the guys in the backfield.
Purdue finished 13th among Big Ten teams in yards per carry against FBS opponents at 4, an even 4. And they were, I think, last tied for 14th with a couple other teams with only 9 touchdown carries. That is not does not include, obviously, that could include quarterback scrambles. It is not corrected for sacks, but still, that gives you a reference point for where they were relative to the rest of the Big Ten. I think the way Josh Henson talks about offense, the way Barry Odom talks about the offense that he expects to have, I believe they have both said, we will run the ball. We are going to run the ball. This is going to be an offense that runs the ball. Like that is a big emphasis. And it kind of brings me into this conversation that we're having about, I guess I'll come back to that in a second. We should very quickly say Zach Crabtree, a guy that had worked with Henson at USC, and was one of his players at Oklahoma State, an offensive lineman there, is the guy that they have targeted to be the offensive line coach. It sounds like that is going to be finalized soon. I don't think it had, last time I talked to someone as a Friday afternoon, it had not been officially finalized, but that's the guy. That's the guy that they've pinpointed. And I think that makes sense too, that Josh Henson, if Barry Odom is going to Josh Henson and saying, your running game wasn't good enough, Josh Henson is saying, well, let me bring my guys in that I know will coach the offensive line the way I need it to be coached so that we can win those battles next season. That seemed like a natural progression. It seemed like a natural guy for him to go get. It's a young guy. He doesn't have a lot of full-time position coach experience, but if he is putting some level of trust in him, having had this long relationship with him, that he is ready for this, we'll find out.
Yeah, and you talk about all the guys that Barry Odom brought in. Josh Henson and Barry Odom hadn't worked together for a decade or something like that, right? Yep. So, even though he hired him to be the offensive coordinator, it's still probably a lot of getting familiar with one another again. And you're right. Zach Crabtree, he was at Fresno State this year. The team took a significant leap in terms of yards per carry, all the running statistics, which is indicative probably of how well your offensive line is playing in some cases. So this is a definite promotion for him to come to Purdue and take over that position group. But you're absolutely right. There has to be some continuity. I think you have to give your coordinators the ability to bring in guys that they know can work their system. And Barry Odom's a defensive guy, so he's in a lot of ways letting the offense be handled by Josh Henson and that offensive staff. So I think it's probably a good move in that regard. It's somebody that Josh Henson at least trusts and knows a little bit about. And it's a guy who, could be a young riser in the sport. Maybe you're giving him an opportunity to kind of prove himself at a place that desperately needs, to mix something up because it didn't work last year.
So the thing I wanted to put a pin in is this: making these specific staff changes compared, and then in conjunction with what they have on the roster. As you already mentioned, they are thin at running back now with who has left, both Devin Mockbee and Malachi Thomas ending their eligibility, Jaheim Merriweather saying that he is going to be leaving via the portal. So I would be shocked if they don't if one of their biggest splashes in the portal doesn't come at running back, because it's a position where last year when they went out and got Malachi Thomas, he kind of knew he was probably coming in, as you said, as like the number 2 guy. There's no number 1 in that room anymore. I thought Antonio Harris flashed some good things last season, but he's certainly not, they're not anointing him as like the lead back at this point. They've got some younger guys in that room that I think they think highly of. But right now, they can go out and appeal to every running back in the portal, the best running backs in the portal, especially the ones who maybe are kind of like what CJ Nunnally was last year, where you've got one more year, you want to level up. You've done well at the group of 5 level, but you want to level up and show off in the Big Ten and show that you belong in the Big Ten and show that you have a professional football future or enhance that future. Then I think that's a guy that they can appeal to say, come here, you can be our featured back. You will be the guy. They won't guarantee it to him, but that opportunity is there where that opportunity might not be somewhere else. And if Purdue's finances are where they say they are, I mean, they've been insistent that they are going to be fully committed to revenue sharing. They are insistent that they're not going to be outbid by anyone. We can talk about that at the end, whether that's even a factor in some ways. But I've been told also that they approach this strategically, where they even had some things maybe held back in reserve to fully attack this portal. I want to be careful how I say that, because I don't think they were going chintzy on last year's portal. They obviously got a ton of guys, but I think they saw where they were going to have to move some resources around. So all those things together, I would be a little bit surprised if whenever you start seeing guys who have been productive backs already going into the portal, I think you're going to probably see Purdue's name attached to them, because they have a need and an opportunity.
Yeah, very much so. And right, Cornell Ford seems like the logical choice to be the coach there. If he's not, maybe
we'll see. That's purely my speculation.
Yeah, and that was my thought too. And then I was like, you maybe get a receivers coach who can bring some guys from a team with him through the portal, because that's another position that I think you have to upgrade in.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think Purdue's probably got to go after every top running back that's in the portal that is within reason. If there's a Heisman Trophy candidate that entered the portal type guy, well, they're probably going to a place that can win a national title next year. But
yeah, I'm really interested in how the payroll management will work, because, and I wonder if this is even, this is beginning me speculating, but like Chops Harkless announcing he's going into the portal. Is Purdue going to really try to outbid to get him when they have several other good defensive tackles that they, I think, believe in, some of whom played more snaps than Chops did this past season? And you got TJ Lindsey coming back healthy, presumably. If all those guys are still available next year, does that allow you to reallocate resources somewhere else? And it makes better sense for the roster. Again, that's just top of my head thing that I'm thinking about. But I would also say that, just like anything else, this is free agency. This is free agency. And in NFL free agency, teams sometimes overpay for a great need at a position, at a place where there is a dearth of options. And if there's only so many running backs at a certain level, but that guy can be one of the best 10 running backs in the Big Ten, maybe they have to push past what their theoretical number that they usually would pay for a running back is, because that guy could make such a difference next year.
Yeah, and that's why Purdue has not only a GM, but now an assistant GM. There are, I haven't seen them, but I assume spreadsheets galore on, how do you evaluate these people in dollars and cents? Because that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Like you can go out and recruit your needs all you want, but this day and age, every guy says, how much can I get to come and play for your program? So you have to put a monetary dollar figure on top of that. And then sometimes if that doesn't work out, then you move on to the next guy. But I don't envy the job of Brandon Lee, who has to try to work all this out with Barry Odom and try to build the best roster possible, where in this day and age, you can offer a lot more than just a college education.
Let's go ahead and get this topic out of the way right now, actually, because we're going to run down what we think like our top 3 positional priorities are for Purdue. Before we get to that, let's just talk about that concept again. Like there isn't a lot of transparency as to how much money teams have. Mike Bobinski says they're going to be fully involved in revenue share. He says that's probably going to be roughly the numbers that you've heard, like 75% maybe going to football. We've heard that number floated around there. In general, I think Purdue will probably go a little heavier into men's basketball than some other teams will. That might cut into football slightly. I don't know. Again, we don't have the numbers, the black and white numbers. I believe from everything that I've heard and people I've talked to that they have the money, that if it were coming down to the money on any particular player, I think they're in good shape. The problem is, last summer I did a story, kind of a series of stories about how they moved the recruiting process from UNLV to Purdue and what goes into that, and then how do they get things set up and getting things started in the Midwest. And one of both, I think all 3, Brandon Lee, Jason Simmons, and Brad Odom, I think all 3 of them said the single biggest obstacle that they were having then in the summer was not money. It was 1-11. It's the stigma of being one of the worst teams in the country. And is that going to still be a problem this winter when you were 2-10? You should have been 4-8 probably, but you were only 2-10. You lost 10 straight games. You did not win a Big Ten game again. Because guys are not just looking for the dollar sign. They will say up front, we don't just want guys looking for the dollar sign. There's guys who are leaving programs where they're not winning and want to go win. And Purdue is going to have to convince more people that it can win instead of showing them that they have. I'm not saying they can't do that, but it is a harder job to do.
Yeah, and we've hit this topic before, but it does not help, at least in the Midwest, the stigma that it's as easy as what Indiana made it look like. That was a scenario.
I don't know that, but I don't think that's even being a comparison that a lot of players are probably making. Like, I don't think they look at Purdue and say, like, well, why aren't you Indiana? I think they know that Indiana is a little bit of an outlier. I think the bigger problem is if you're a recruit and you're comparing Purdue and Minnesota or Illinois or
right. Northwestern,
those teams,
all those middle of the pack,
Northwestern,
well, middle
that's
to
a great
lower
example.
end Big Ten teams.
Louisville, like Missouri, like let's talk about regionally. Like you're comparing Purdue to all those teams. Cincinnati, I think they were a little down this year. Actually, I don't even know what their record was, but their recent history is fairly successful. Like what I'm saying. Like I think that's the bigger stumbling block right now.
Yeah, and I understand the stigma, but at some point you have to, I know Barry Odom wants to be a developmental guy and get high school kids and believes in, building it out for 3 and 4 years with a specific group. But you also have to get those guys who can come in and help you win right away. Last year, they were kind of, just patching a roster together and hoping that they could put a bunch of guys together and win right away. It didn't work. A lot of those guys probably weren't the caliber of player to do that at the Big Ten level against that schedule. But, you get some holdover pieces and, you just have to convince maybe the right guys, and then dollars and cents. Yeah, maybe you're going to have to outbid or overpay for specific positions. But this season is so pivotal for the future of the program because you can't go 2-10, 3-9, something like that again, and then still try to convince people. You still I think you get a little bit of a leeway because it's still a relatively new staff that took over kind of a train wreck situation. But, you got to hit on the guys that you get in the portal and the recruits that you brought in this year to get this thing rolling.
I think that's a fair way to look at it. And that's how I've tried to look at it. That, and I've had some arguments with fans about this, that Barry Odom's 2-10 does not make 3-21 his identity. This staff, this roster right now, they were 2-10. They have to own that, but they were 2-10 that should have been 4-8 and weren't getting blown out the way that they were during the 1-11 season, the past coaching staff. So they have to own that, but they can now put that behind them with what they do in year two. If you don't start doing that in year two, then it starts to become your identity. They're well aware of that. I don't have to tell them that. And that's what is driving them right now. So let's talk about the portal. Let's talk about where we think Purdue needs help at every position. Like they would, I think, be the first ones to say.
That's not just a Purdue. Every team should be looking to upgrade every position on its roster. So.
Well, to some extent, yes. I also think that that there is something to be said for getting to the basketball model, which is and it's two different roster structures, so it's not going to be exactly the same, but where you're enhancing what you have rather than having to rebuild or build a whole roster through the portal, right? So I think right now if it's like a bell curve, you know what I mean? Like last year was all the way over here, like you got to rebuild the whole roster, and I think they're on the way up the bell curve. We'll see how far up that actually is. We'll have a better sense of that by the end of this month or into January. But yes, they need help at every position. But I thought we should have a conversation about where they need the most help, because I think it's a good chance to go back over the roster, get some recognition of where things worked and where they didn't, and then look at how hard it might be to do some of the things that they may want to do. But what was your number 3 position that you think they need the most help at?
Secondary would be the one, and
let's split up corner and safety there. Then
okay,
here let's do quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, offensive line.
That's fair.
Rush end, D tackles, linebackers, corners, safeties. So there's 5 on each.
I would say corners then, because that was we saw a lot of big plays against Purdue's defense this year, and a lot of that was just the play or lack of Tony Grimes. Hadori Hines was a guy who had a lot of promise. Was a guy that in camp people were talking about, but he gave up, I think at one point, I don't know if it's still true, was giving up more passing yard or more receiving yards than any defensive back in the country. So that's not a promising sign if you're a coach that's on that defensive staff, or Charles Clark, who coaches the secondary. You have to upgrade there. And Ryan Turner was a guy that got some play. Maybe it was not until that Indiana game, but he was a guy that was throughout camp with the number one unit, and then he just wasn't once the season started. And then he got a chance late. But, I think they brought in a couple through the signing class, a handful of DBs, and whether they're corners or safeties, that'll probably be determined throughout spring and fall ball. But it's just like you cannot give up that many chunk plays. At one point I was in the season, maybe halfway through, I was counting up, and the number of 40+ yard plays that Purdue had given up like trumped everybody else in the Big Ten by a large margin. And when we talk about games that Purdue was close in a lot of these instances and more competitive than the year before, that was a difference in a lot of those games. You think of that Rutgers game, just got torched. Illinois was a game that didn't get out of hand, but you gave up 1 million yards to one guy. USC had, it wasn't even the Biletnikoff winner, Mekhi Lemon, who went off. It was Jacoby Lane, I believe, in that game. So just giving up those big chunk plays. And that's not totally on the cornerbacks, but that's where it starts. You have to have good coverage corners, especially the way that Purdue plays defense.
Corner was my number 2 position. And for all the reasons that you just stated, part of it is you are losing Tony Grimes. You're losing some other guys who were in that secondary who conceivably could have played corner. But you're right. Like most of the season, it was Grimes and Hines, and Turner very much disappeared from the conversation for a long time, and then finally came back a little bit at the end. He is still available to be here next season, I believe. I think he has one more year.
He's got a year of eligibility left.
Yeah. You've got some guys like Khalil Cummings, Travion Wright, I think, got on the field a little bit, but really, like, they didn't get a lot of other younger guys on the field at that position this year. And it wasn't like the guys at the top were necessarily draping themselves in great play, right? Like the Illinois game, the Rutgers game, like there was just some games where they really got torched. And they have to go find someone to be what Tony Grimes was supposed to be this past year, I think, which was the veteran, late career, going out with a bang kind of guy. I think that would be somebody who can take on the other team's Hank Beatty, the other team's leading receiver. This isn't the old days of the Big Ten. All the best teams have great receivers, and they have great quarterbacks. Cornerback is a massively, massively important position. And I think what we're going to see, though, here is a theme that where Purdue needs the most help, a lot of other teams also need the most help.
Telling of that cornerback situation real quick, because you're mentioning quarterbacks. The best game Purdue's corners played all year long was Minnesota, which had maybe the worst quarterback that Purdue played during the conference season. Minnesota had a pretty good year, went to a bowl game, and somehow that program just keeps every year churning out 6 or 7 wins. Probably, a lot of ways how Purdue was 20 years ago. Just get into bowl games consistently, and that's satisfactory. If you're in this department, at least right now, I'm sure Purdue would love to be in the situation that Minnesota's in. But I thought that was maybe a turning the corner point, and no, it turned out it was just you faced a quarterback that was a freshman and wasn't maybe as good as some of the other quarterbacks you played.
I think that conversation is going to come up again here in a few minutes later in this conversation. I think I have more to say kind of along those lines. My number 3 position was wide receiver. Josh Henson was asked late this season, I believe Tom Dienhart, our buddy from Golden Black, asked about do they need more playmakers? And he gave a very, do I want to say political, like a very, I thought they did a good job, this coaching staff this year. Like they're falling on the grenade a lot. They're not blaming their lack of talent. There was obviously a lack of talent. There was obviously a lack of receiver talent. There was a lack of, breakaway ability. There was a lack of ability catching the ball for the first half of the season. It was just not
their best breakaway receiver just vanished off the face of the earth, though.
Yeah. Well, the Ahmad Branch disappearance, the fact that they didn't have Denilah Morissette all season, like there were any number of things that were going on in that receiver room that were kind of baffling and or limiting to what they could accomplish. So they've got to get help here. And it's another position where I think they can look, anybody who's on their way in can look at this roster and say, there are multiple starting jobs up for grabs. I can come in there and transition from being a guy who's just in the rotation somewhere at the place I am. I can go there and get the ball a lot. I can, if you're in a group of 5 and you've been having a good career, or FCS and having a great career, and you think you can come up and prove yourself in the Big Ten for one season, I think that opportunity is going to be there. They've got to get more out of those guys. There just has to be more reliability, and there has to be more guys making big plays. We saw it in flashes from Nitro Tuggle. That's technically, I think, the one starter who is going to be back. There's some other guys who did play a decent amount. Corey Smith, Jesse Watson, some younger guys. I don't know if Chauncey Magwood might be eligible for a medical waiver if he pursues one, because he only played 2 games this year. He would ordinarily be out, but he would have that opportunity maybe to play. But still, this just seems like another version of running back. And I didn't have running back in my top 3 just because I think they have enough guys where they could make something work. But receiver, I think, is the more urgent of the two in terms of finding a single guy who can put you over the top.
Yeah, and I did not put receiver in my top 3, and it's not to say that they don't need help at receiver, because Purdue does. But the reason I didn't is because the name you mentioned, Denylon Morissette, who theoretically could come back. He's a guy who got hurt right before the Ball State game. I think he would have been one of the key playmakers for this offense this year. And all year long, we kind of asked about him every few weeks. When's he coming back? And we kept hearing he's getting close. Never happened. He never played a game this season, but he can be a big help. And then go all the way back to the very first game of the season against Ball State. Jaleel Hall, the true freshman receiver, made a big play, got hurt in that game, and it ended his season. We don't know what kind of potential he had. He was a guy that big body receiver, looked like he was going to be able to help that offense. And unfortunately, I think had 1 catch for 9 yards or 11 yards or whatever it was, and got hurt on it in that first game of the year. So you add those guys with Nitro Tuggle. I don't know about the guy who transferred from Utah. He never played this year, as far as I know. David Washington. Yeah. So, he's a guy that when he came in, I thought might be able to help this past season, but he didn't. Purdue did sign 2 receivers, JoJo Johnson, which they flipped from Charlotte, I believe. Was it?
That's a good question. No, it was maybe
Coastal Carolina.
Coastal Carolina.
Yeah. And then they signed Brandon Kinsey, who they've been on for a long time, who's probably the prize recruit out of those 2. But I think you've got good depth there, that if you are a developmental program and you bring back some guys from injury, you've got a chance to make something with that wide receiver room. They should go get more receivers, but that's not a position group that I put in my top 3.
Fair enough. I already said my number 2 was corner. What was your number 2?
My number 2 was quarterback. And listen, like Ryan Brown was a good quarterback for part of this season. I do think he regressed a little bit later in the year, but I don't know how much of that was a variety of situations going on with, offensive line and, losing a running back and, receivers and losing George Burhan. But the quarterback position was not good enough to win in the Big Ten, to the point where you get into a bowl game, which is not something that we asked about. It's something Barry Odom specifically said after the IU game, when we're going to a bowl game next year, is what he said. You've got to have better quarterback play. Maybe Ryan Brown can give you that, but I think the easiest option is to go out and get a guy who's played a lot of college football. We've seen this quarterbacks transfer elsewhere and have immediate success and elevate a program. Look at who just won the Heisman Trophy the other day. No, that's not going to happen at Purdue. That's a unique scenario, but you can go get somebody who can elevate your offense to that next level through the transfer portal, especially if you're willing to pay the right price.
I didn't put quarterback in my top 3. I've been very ambivalent about the quarterback. I keep going back and forth on the quarterback thing. Yes, if you have the ability to go get a surefire upgrade at quarterback, do it. I think that is on the table. Those guys are very expensive. I know that they currently expect Ryan Brown to remain with this program next season. they have lost one quarterback. Malachi Singleton did go into the transfer portal. I don't think that surprised anyone after his role was really just, packages. And even after he played better, I thought, than Brown head to head against Washington, he got basically no run against IU in the finale. You still got Bennett Meredith. You still got Evans Chuba. You still got Garrett Odom on scholarship, and then Corin Berry coming into that conversation. Can Purdue, if nobody else leaves, add someone else and have 6 quarterbacks on scholarship?
Right now, as it is, if you assume all the guys who have announced they're going to enter the transfer portal leave Purdue, and all of the guys who haven't announced yet, plus the signees, I think roster is at 102 right now. So that gives you slight wiggle room, but you've got to add at some other positions too.
Well,
so.
Yeah, to me, it's not about the total number. It's the allocation of resources to one position. And yes, it's the most important position. But I asked Barry Odom this question at the signing day press conference: is adding quarterbacks dependent on attrition at that position? He said, yes, it'll depend on who leaves. So one person is left. I believe all these guys are on scholarship. I believe Garrett Odom is on scholarship. I know Corin Berry is going to be on scholarship. I believe Evans Chuba and Bennett Meredith are both still on scholarship. So I don't have a reason not to think that at this point. So are you going to go to a 6th scholarship quarterback? I don't know. I think there are arguments for doing that to give Ryan Brown more competition, because he does have to improve. I don't think he would argue that. I think the performance does have to be better. When you look at last year, of the 16 quarterbacks who qualified, I'm looking at cfbstats.com, 16 Big Ten quarterbacks who qualified, Ryan Brown was last in quarterback rating, 113.23. The 9 interceptions were the second most. He and Mark Gronowski from Iowa were the only ones who only threw 7 touchdown passes. That was the lowest in the Big Ten. Yards per attempt, also pretty low. At the same time, I'm going to read you another stat line. Well, I'll just read them in comparison. So Preston Stone from Northwestern, he had 6.2 yards per attempt compared to Brown's 6.3. He had 11 touchdown passes compared to Brown's 7, but he also threw 12 interceptions compared to Brown's 9. Again, this is only against FBS teams. Who cares what you did against Indiana State? 58.7%, exactly the same completion percentage. And I didn't look up what they did relative to each other as running the ball, but Preston Stone was not a better quarterback than Ryan Brown. I thought Purdue had the better quarterback against both Minnesota and Northwestern, and they lost both of those games, and both of those teams are going to bowl games. But I thought Northwestern was maybe the best example for the season, and I was surprised to see this. Drake Lindsey's numbers were a lot better in terms of, especially in touchdown interception ratio. But comparing Preston Stone and Ryan Brown head to head, you see where this quarterback, this level of quarterback play, can get you to 6 wins. But what's the biggest difference? That Northwestern is much better at the other 21 positions than Purdue is right now, and buys its quarterback more room for error. And take the names off of it, whether it's Ryan Brown or not, whoever's quarterbacking Purdue this past season did not have as much talent around him as some of the other quarterbacks who are their peers statistically in the Big Ten. And I think that has to be addressed. Like, you have to get him a better offensive line. You have to get him more playmakers. You have to get more out of this running game. You have to stop allowing so many points and explosive plays on defense. You have to start, there has to be a more, not to use the coach speak, but, complementary football. There's a lot of things that have to happen that, if they all happen, your quarterback play would also look better. And it could still that same level of quarterback play. It's the exact, they are mirror images of each other. That exact same level of quarterback play would get you 6 wins at Northwestern, but it can't get you 6 wins at Purdue right now. So do you raise the level of everyone else, which is difficult and expensive logistically, or do you bring in one really strong quarterback to try to lift everything, which is also difficult and expensive logistically?
Yeah, well, Ryan Brown is also the only quarterback. Bennett Meredith played 1 game at Northwestern 2 years ago, splitting reps with Ryan Brown. The only other quarterback who has any experience on this roster in a game is Ryan Brown, and he played this past season as a full-time starter, and the year before was a fill-in starter for Hudson Card for a couple of games. I think you probably need an experienced quarterback, whether he competes for the job or not, that you feel comfortable in. Not saying that Purdue doesn't feel comfortable in the other guys that it has, but you want somebody who's been in those moments.
No, I think that is a reason why I would add another quarterback too. And it's not even necessarily you're sure that it's somebody who would be better than Ryan Brown, but I would bring someone in who's going to compete with him for that job. I don't think the guys on this list, I mean, they already competed with him once for the job and didn't get it. So, except for Cornberry, who wasn't here, but he's going to be a true freshman. And I don't know that he's in position to come in right away and beat him out. So, that's another reason why I would add someone, just because I think you need to raise the level of competition in that room, which could maybe then push Ryan Brown in the offseason. Not that he won't do it on his own, but competition always helps, I think, from an athletic standpoint. Let me ask you this: yes or no? Is Ryan Brown the opening day quarterback next season?
Yes.
I think that is probably true as I sit here today. So we've done my 3 and my 2. My number 1 was rush end. And on paper, that's not a position where they have a numbers problem necessarily. Breon Ishmael, I thought, came along and looked better as the season went along and started making some plays. You still have, and again, this is all contingent. This is based on who is still on the roster or has not yet declared that they're going into the portal. All of this stuff could change between now and the time I'm done saying this sentence, let alone by the time you read it, let alone by the time January 2nd comes around. But you've got Breon Ishmael, CJ Madden, and Trey Smith, who are your opening day starters, still around. You've got some younger guys, but they had to go to the portal to get CJ Nunnally the fourth to come in and I think be their best rush in. And I was arguing might have been their most impactful player on defense for most of the season. And I think they have to do that. They have to go find CJ Nunnally the fourth, the second. They have to go find someone else who is an upper tier edge rusher, not just a defensive end, an edge rusher, a guy who's going to come in, because whoever you get at cornerback isn't going to help you enough if you're not pairing it with pass rush. I don't think the pass rush off the edge was good enough without CJ Nunnally consistently this past season. He's moving on. You've got to go get somebody else to be that kind of presence, that intimidating presence off the edge, productive presence off the edge. And I think it's the reason I put it number 1 is it is a position that can change everything. Like it can make everything in your defense better if you get the right special guy there. And I don't know that guy is going to be readily available. If he is, the most powerful teams in the country also will want him. So shopping at the top of the list may not be where it can happen, but go get another or 2 more CJ Nunnallys. Like put them, you can use the CJ Nunnally example with them. Say, hey, this guy came here and had a really strong year, did what he wanted to do, I think, transitioning from the MAC to the Big Ten, except for not really getting his opportunity to start right away. In retrospect, you wonder what maybe that took so long. But I think the performance was there. I think they could go get a couple of guys like that, or at least one. You've got to go replenish, because these other guys have not yet in their career shown any kind of consistent, true edge rushing, consistent ability. And you've got to have that. You have to have it, or none of these other defensive improvements probably mean anything.
Yeah, and this goes back to a conversation I had at Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas back at the end of July. I was talking to CJ Madden about sacking, and he said, well, if the secondary does its job, that allows me time to get to the quarterback. CJ Madden did not have the year that I think he thought he would, or that most thought he would, but also the secondary didn't have the year that he probably needed to help in that regard. He has eligibility left, so he could come back. Breon Ishmael could come back, and their improvements or progress or whatever you want to call it was a reason why I thought Purdue's got some guys who can help there already. Again, needs help, but didn't put it in my top 3. But it kind of centered around the fact that I think that Breon Ishmael is probably a pretty good rush end. CJ Madden is a guy that Purdue clearly believes in because they named him a captain last year. But he did not statistically have a year that says he's capable of, being a marquee player on a defense at this level.
Yeah, again, I think there's such a difference between being a starting defensive end and being a rush end presence. And if you can go out and get, like, we were having conversations late in this season, just colloquially, just casually, before and after practice or whatever, in the media room before basketball games. Like, who are Purdue's all Big Ten players this year? Like, who would you vote for even like third team all Big Ten? I was like, Spencer Porath, that might have been the only guy who I would have voted for second or third team. Maybe Manny Powell, maybe. There just weren't a lot of real options. And if that's the position where if you can go get even like a third team All Big Ten edge rusher, you change games. You make your defense, you buy your defense so much room for error. You force teams to double team him. You give your secondary more reps per game where they don't have to be on an island for extended periods of time. I think it goes in conjunction. That's why rush end and corner were my top two, because I think those are two positions where if you can get really strong players, I'm not saying they have to be first team All Big Ten players. Those are usually the guys who Ohio State and Oregon and whoever else have already developed, Indiana. But if you can go out and get guys who are in that mix down the ballot a little bit, you start to change what this defense does on a game in, game out basis. They need help on both sides of the ball, but that's the one where I think those are guys who it could be almost immediate. You bring in a guy with that kind of edge rush skill, it changes the game.
Yeah, and man, this is going to be maybe one of the biggest what ifs in Purdue football during this transitional period. But Will Helt is a super talented guy who I think was in the wrong defensive scheme for his skills. And then he transferred to Clemson this past season, which forced Purdue to have to go out and look for some more defensive end help. He goes to Clemson, starts 12 games, 15 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. I think that would have helped significantly if Purdue could have, been able to retain him with the new staff, but it didn't. So now you're back in the situation again where you're kind of chasing a guy that can really help you in that regard. Let me look at the Russians, because there's somebody that I was high on in camp, Landon Brooks, who was a true freshman last year, and he looks like Will Helt. He's like 6'6", 6'7", big dude, probably needed to get stronger, as everybody does when they get to college. But I think that, if you are a developmental program like Purdue says, and you have these guys who you set out for a whole year, hoping to get them in the weight room, put on 25 pounds of muscle, get them a little bit faster, then there's a potential to have some success with names that are already within your program that nobody knows about yet. But that's, until it happens, you don't know. My number one, I bounced around because, like you said, there's so many, they need help everywhere. There's no right or wrong answers here, because the real answer is that Purdue has to get better at every position. But I went with running back just because the room's so thin. As of now, four running backs on the roster. That's including, walk-on Carter Holsworth, and then that's including incoming freshman Isaiah Wright. So the only guys who have any experience in a game are Antonio Harris, who was like the number 3 running back for a good portion of this season, and Jerron Thomas, who was a true freshman who didn't play until the very last game of the year, I believe. And that's your running back room. And as of right now, you have nobody coaching that group. But, Antonio, like you said, Antonio Harris had some nice plays. He showed some flashes, but I don't know that he's a guy that right now you think you can count on as a, carry the load for 2 out of 3 plays every series.
Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily. I mean, it's always great if you have that, the bell cow. I mean, he showed us some things in preseason camp too. Like, I thought he had a really good spring preseason camp. Like, there were some flashes of things then too. It was just a matter of, well, how much are you going to get to show it, because Maccabee is going to be out there a lot. They actually got even more carries even when Maccabee was healthy than maybe I would have suspected in certain games. I think this is not a bad call for number one, just because of the things I said before. I think it's the one position where they can offer someone almost face of the franchise kind of opportunity. Like, you can come in here and we will showcase you. We are building a better offensive line. It's starting with a coaching change we've already made. We are bringing in we're changing how we coach running backs because we want to get more out of that position. We are committed to running back. We are committed. Here's the financial offer we're making to back that up. And not only that, but you can come here and it is your job to lose, more or less. Not that Antonio Harris and the other guys won't get their opportunity. But he also goes back to what I was saying before, too, about the quarterbacks. I do think that they need more talent in that room to push the competitives to make those younger guys better. I don't think you can go in and not have someone who is that Geron Thomas doesn't have to try to beat out. You know what I mean? That the other guys that they have in that room doesn't have to beat out for their opportunities, right? There's got to be somebody, Isaiah Wright, the freshman's coming in. Like there's got to be somebody at the top, and it just feels like the position where, especially if you're not going to go get involved at quarterback in a really expensive situation, then maybe that's a position where it makes sense, especially on a 1-year shot. Put your money there and try to get a guy who can change your offense overnight.
Yeah, and we're saying this without knowing who is going to be in the portal. There's probably still a lot of guys who are going to announce after bowl games or who knows what. That's what I like best maybe about this new January 2nd date is that it allows people to stay with their team and play in the bowl games, whereas before guys felt like they had to opt out and try to find a new team right away. There were a lot of guys who did that. You're seeing less and less of that. I thought Purdue would have far more people and that they were entering the portal already. And I think the number right now is, what is it?
8, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's 8. Yeah.
So, and other than Chops Harkless, there's nobody that I was like, you can't really afford to lose that guy. And, Armand Branch was probably one that we assumed was going to happen just because we hadn't heard anything about him for a while, other than coaches saying that effort was an issue and things like that. So, I think that the easy answer to fix a lot of things is to get a running back that's proven that, like you said, maybe a group of 5 guy who's run for 1,000 yards is still. This is a story that you wrote last year. How long it's been since Purdue had a 1,000-yard back, and it's longest in FBS, and it hasn't happened in 2 decades almost. So
the 1,000-yard thing is much less of a concern for me than the down for down production.
No, I think it's more telling though that that's a position that Purdue has not had. Devin Mockabee was great, but his best season was as a redshirt freshman under a different. That was 2 head coaches ago, and a team that was really not going to use him until it had a rash of injuries and he kind of stumbled into the starting spot. So it's definitely, if you're trying to rebrand Purdue football under Barry Odom and this staff, that's where you can start, and you can show Devin Mockabee walking out on senior day and the place cheering wildly for him and say, hey, this is what this place thinks of running backs that come here and succeed. Don't you want to be a part of that?
I think that's it. I've made the point in a couple of things I've written about, keeping the cradle of quarterbacks thing going at Purdue. And I think, as we've talked about here, like they've got to have better quarterback play in 2026 than they did in 2025. However, there's something to be said for that. That Barry Odom needs to come in and establish something of running backs. What starts with an R? I'll come up with that. I'll workshop that. We'll come up with something like that. We'll have an answer for that by the next time we talk about football.
And then Purdue will trademark it and call Mike Allstott and Corey Sheets and all these guys and Leroy Keys posthumously can be inducted into this club or whatever. So
the rotunda of running backs. The regatta of running backs. I'll come up with something. That's going to end it for today's conversation. Keep following indystar.com/sports/Boilermakers, jconline.com/Boilermakers. I don't remember what your whole URL is. You guys know how the internet works. You'll figure it out. Follow us there. Follow us on various social medias. We'll keep bringing you information, and a week off for basketball. So we may not talk to you again until Saturday here in Indianapolis against Auburn at the Indy Classic. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.